Hello, beautiful seekers. Welcome to Moon Magic, to one of my favorite full moons of the year, the Sagittarius full moon. As many of you know, I am a bit of a Sagittarius fan. It's an energy I really relate to. It's my rising sign, and it's also just some of the most important beings in my life have been Sages and are Sages. So this is really beautiful, warm, inviting, fiery energy. But I will say this about this Sag moon, you guys. It is in the midst of a really powerful time. And 2019 has already been a year where it is no longer about what we've done in the past, right? And I guess that's true for every year, but there's something about this year where chains are being broken. Old narratives are being broken, narratives that some of us were riding with for quite a number of years, feeling as though that was normal and probably even served us in that time, and they're going away. And this full moon has a lot of firepower, so to speak, when it comes to that type of dialogue. You know, this is a full moon that will be happening on June 17th. It's going exact at 1:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it's going to be happening at 25 degrees of Sagittarius. So the sun will be at 25 degrees of Gemini, and the moon will be at 25 degrees of Sagittarius, the Gemini-Sagittarius axis. Just to start off this conversation, you know, Sagittarius is the sign of expansion. And the moon is not only in Sagittarius, but Jupiter is at home in Sagittarius this year. And of course, Jupiter is having a bit of a little retrograde and hanging out. But those two energies are in the sign of Sagittarius are going to ask us to expand and to understand our deeper emotional growth, right? And it's kind of this thing of once you have outgrown something, once you have changed and morphed past who you've been, what you valued, how you moved through the world, maybe even 6 months ago, there's no going back. And when things meet you that look or feel the same as that old container, you know, sometimes we try and step into that old container and just check in with it, and we can't do it. You know, it blocks us, or it feels really uncomfortable, or we just physically can't go back there, right? And that's really the energy that comes in with this full moon. You know, full moons are all about endings, completions, rounding out, fruition, seeing clearly in the light of the intuitive moon, and not being able to hide where we want to open our hearts or where we want to shift away. And having the moon in Sagittarius, it's always like a really blunt full moon, regardless of what the other planets are doing. The Sagittarius full moon will tell it like it is. I remember last year I was sitting out on my deck. I just took the evening for myself, and I just was like, all right, I'm ready to hear whatever I need to hear. And that moon told me, you know, the energy of that day just laid it out for me in like 5-second sentences. And I was just like, whoa, okay. Okay, I hear you. So this moon has that character, but the thing with this one in 2019 is that it has an even richer character of that because, well, there's a number of reasons. One, we're only 3 or 4 days away from the solstice. So we're hitting into that really magnified shift in the sun, in our journey with the sun. And so already we're getting this sense of shifting from Gemini to Cancer season. We're getting this shift into the second half of the year. The solstice tends to have this very magnified kind of shift over energy. So we're walking through that kind of portal, and this full moon is kind of like a ceremonial opening. Not only that, but this is the last full moon we're going to have before eclipse season starts. And right now our eclipses are happening in Cancer and Capricorn. And we'll have our first eclipse on July 2nd in Cancer. So this full moon is one of the last ones we're going to have for a couple months here that has a bit of a more traditional kind of full moon effect, right? We're not having the eclipse action like we'll have in July. So with Sagittarius full moon, we're getting the bluntness, we're getting the truth. And what we're doing here is you may see little previews of what you're going to be incorporating, shifting, connecting, clearing, opening during eclipse season during this Sag full moon. It's kind of like a movie premiere where you get to go and you get to watch. Now you get to choose how much you want to see into that and how much you want to just relax into when July starts and when we are in Cancer season and when we are having Mercury retrograde and all of those things happening. But for those of you who are willing or are in a place where you want to really be aware of how you want to do the work over the next month or two from this moon forward, this is a great time to listen and let that truth telling come your way. Because if there's one thing that I know about the Gemini Sagittarius axis, and I am basically surrounded, my world is full of gems and Sages, it's kind of wild, is truth telling, right? It is communication, it is expansion, it is truth telling, it is movement. And these are mutable fire and air, so there's no time for like kind of holding on to things or letting things trickle through rock, right? There's this mutable, moving energy. It's this molten landscape, is the way I like to describe it, and you kind of have to get into riding that molten wave a little bit. So this moon is setting the stage for the solstice, for eclipse season, for a big Mercury retrograde in another water sign, and the Mercury retrogrades and water signs are extremely powerful right now. So regardless of what's going on this specific night with the other planets, which we're about to get into, you can kind of see how symbolically this luminary, this particular time of illumination is symbolic of death and rebirth. Jupiter is a really fun planet, right? Everybody's kind of a fan of the expansive playfulness of it, but it can be overwhelming too. Jupiterian energy is like no stopping. It's like being on a very fast train and suddenly you don't know where the brakes are. And so look out for yourselves. Make sure you're taking care of yourselves, nurturing yourselves. Don't let the fire pull you away from yourself. Now, let's get into what is going on with the planets around this moon, because it adds another level of truth telling, connecting the dots, being really honest with how you want to move through the world, and getting a lot of clarity on that front, on those fronts. So there's this really interesting thing, and this is actually tied to the Gemini new moon we just had. So the Gemini new moon, we were starting to have these aspects in conversation. Now at this full moon, they're coming into exact degree alignments. So the first one is Jupiter squaring Neptune. We talked about this in the Gemini new moon and how Jupiter and Neptune can kind of get us in over our heads. You know, we can get a little bit over romanticizing and we can get into more addictive tendencies, into old patterning. You know, the classic examples being, you know, drinking a lot, or texting an ex is probably like the best Jupiter square Neptune example. Like texting somebody you know, you're just going to repeat a pattern, but you have that beautiful fantastical vision of the person, or you have that version of reality that exists that's very fantastical, you know, and you want it to work. So that expansive why not Jupiter energy is like, yeah. So Jupiter and Neptune are squaring off. Jupiter in Sag, Neptune in Pisces. They're both home and they're going exact the day before this full moon on June 16th. So that dialogue of like, where are you letting fantasy trip you up, actually? You know, I'm a big fan of fantasizing, but I find it so interesting how, you know, we have beautiful fantasies that I think are really nourishing and nurturing to us, that really help our souls open up and vibrate higher. But we also have fantasies that hold us. You know, we relive the same fantasy over and over again, and actually there are like key components of those fantasies that are part of an old pattern, are part of an old paradigm that we no longer are. And there can almost be pain in kind of reliving those or daydreaming into those fantasies. And I think this square brings us that kind of clarity with where we're wanting to continue our fantasizing and where we aren't. And it is a challenging square. You know, because Jupiter and Neptune both want to dream and be fantastical, you know, but when they're heading off in their in their respective signs like this, they're also saying, but how is that serving you, right? So it's really powerful. Like we said, we started that dialogue with the new moon at the beginning of June. The other exact conversation that is happening right around this full moon is the Saturn sextiling Neptune. That is going direct on the 18th of June at 18 degrees of the respective signs. 18 is a really strong number around this moon. It's one of my favorite numbers. So Saturn is at home in Capricorn, and so is Neptune at home in Pisces. And this is a little bit more of a helpful one. So like where I was just saying, like what fantasies are helping you, what fantasies are hurting you, this takes it to another level. So the day after this full moon, you can start to think about, okay, the fantasies that are working for you, how do you want those to cascade down and get rooted in your feet and in your physical body? You know, Saturn and Neptune are in the sextile like this. It's a beautiful conversation because we have the grounding, we have the real world, we have the action, we have the presence of that Capricorn Saturn flow, and we have the dreamy fantasticalness of Neptune and Pisces. And when those two are conversing, like I was talking about it in the last new moon, it's a bridge builder between that fantastical energetic source, us tapped into that, and our physical determination. And it's that kind of idea of if you want something you've never had before, you have to do something that you've never done before. That conversation is really going to help you think about, okay, you know, if I really want to live this lifestyle, I'm going to need to get in contact with these people. I'm going to need to start looking at how I want to approach this problem, or get on a phone call with who I need to get on a phone call with, right? It's got this really nurturing, ooey gooey goodness. So I kind of like that we start with the more challenging aspect, and then the day after the moon, we end with a much more reciprocal aspect, right? There is more though, you guys. This moon just keeps going. Mars and Mercury are conjunct in Cancer during this full moon. And I know a lot of people have been feeling the jitters of Gemini season. There's been some anxiety. There's been some anxiousness around releasing. There's been some anxiousness around all the shifts. There were a lot of surprises in May. And then June brought in a little bit more of this high intensity energy to it. And part of what's going on there is, you know, Mars and Mercury moving into Cancer and then being basically conjunct during this full moon is we are going to the root of our emotional core, right? Mars, the warrior, the doer, the initiator, and Mercury, the communicator, the trickster, the messenger. Those two together are, you know, they fire each other up. They want to have really high intensity conversation. And in Cancer, they're taking that conversation to our internal world, which is really where things are happening. Over and over again, you know, we get the same message that where our deepest happiness comes from, our deepest contentment is from within. It's from fostering that deep relationship. Now, this is challenging. Mars and Mercury are not necessarily comfortable in Cancer. They don't necessarily know how to move through Cancer because they're much more about fire and air and movement. And Cancer is like, let's listen, right? So it takes that intense drive for communication and movement internal, which is where you could feel antsy. You could feel really hungry for answers. That's full moons tend to bring that. You could feel really antsy for movement because these two planets are going to rile up any stagnant energy. They are going to rile up any emotions that you have either tried to repress or ignore. They are going to rile up and kind of get the pot boiling for you to move through it. And I really, you know, want you guys to think about riding those waves, not as something negative. You know, the whole idea of like mood swings and having changes in moods has been so demonized. And of course, if you're being abusive with it or you're trying to manipulate people with it, of course, that's not going to work out great. Like I would recommend that, you know. That's never what we're talking about here. But when it's about the fact that you are moving through an emotional landscape. The ability to witness yourself in that emotional landscape with no judgment, no expectations, and just curiosity and kindness. You will find these waves, they come, but they go. And with each successive wave, especially if you stick with yourself, you stick on your team, clarity comes. So it is turbulent. This moon is a little bit like being on a stormy sea. It's a little bit like being in a boat with a big storm and lightning and there being big waves and you getting these big vibrant flashes of insight. And the thing is, though, you're safe. Unlike being on maybe a boat in the middle of the ocean in a storm like that where your safety is not guaranteed, in this moon there is safety. As long as you are willing to stay with yourself, right? Once again, that Jupiter square Neptune is going to make you want to be a little bit more compulsive with maybe old patterning when it comes to like grabbing a drink or texting somebody or distracting yourself with those tools. And it's okay in moderation, of course. You know, we do what we can with what we have at hand. However, that is a way to kind of step out of it. So just be kind of aware that if you're trying to pull away from an emotion or you're feeling an uncomfortable emotion, there's probably something really good in that information. There's probably something that you really need to hear. And we are closest to source and we are closest to divine love. And I really believe this when we let ourselves feel those uncomfortable emotions. Sometimes, you know, we feel very far away from what we want or the people we love, or we feel very far away even from ourselves or from our path. And in that space that we're feeling, there is so much room for you to welcome in divine love and safety and knowledge. And a really great prayer or mantra that I like to use in those spaciousness places where we have ourselves and our feeling and our space from the thing that we're wanting is to say, you know, source, higher self, angels, God, however you like to help connect in with that energy. Show me how to surrender. Show me how to listen. Show me how to move and what to say. Show me the next right step. And that's all you need as you ride through this full moon. But it is going to illuminate a lot. And just be aware that whatever this full moon is illuminating will most likely be themes that you will be working through on the eclipses, and you can start to refine these conversations on the eclipses as they roll through. So if you're willing to kind of hear your syllabus, so to speak, in this moon on June 17th, then as the eclipses come, I think you'll be able to really utilize them as amazing leaping off points for building some really great stuff. Let's pull some cards. I knew this was going to be a long talk. I was like, I don't even know how I'm going to get through everything I want to say about the Sag full moon. What do we have? Emperor. Mars in Cancer, right? Mars is definitely a part of this conversation. And like I said, putting the warrior into the divine feminine of Cancer can be really healing. And actually Aries right now is going through a revolution. We're going through a healing revolution with our inner warrior, with our masculine, because Chiron is in Aries right now for several years. It's really helping us find new ways of applying beautiful masculine energy in ways that work well. 9 of Cups. I love it. I love it. And so Mars in Cancer is kind of fitting because it's mirroring that dialogue with Chiron and Aries. Mars in Cancer is going to be very healing if you are willing to sit with it. Queen of Swords. Truth, man. I tell you what, this full moon is notorious. It is notorious for being blunt. Anybody hang out with any Sages? Have you heard any opinions? Which I love personally. 2 of Wands. Okay, I love this. I love this 4-card spread. Because we have all that potential. All that clarity of vision. It really is kind of being up at a high point and having a 20-mile view of the landscape. Emperor, 9 of Cups, Queen of Swords, 2 of Wands. Beautiful. Every single one of these images has a being who can see with utter clarity, right? And is willing to see, is willing to take that seat at the table. Now, each of these has a different modality, and each of these is a different way of seeing, of incorporating, of saying yes to the path. Ace, or the Emperor, it is the father archetype, the patriarchal archetype, right? The masculine vision of being able to sit in one's own power and have autonomy and supreme control, right? Now, of course, there's nothing that we can control. The goal is not to control, and that's the shadow side of emperors, right? Being controlling, being too forceful. The beautiful side of this energy and where we want to focus is there's a knowing of the value, right? There's a knowing of the power. There's a knowing of the centeredness, the inherent value that is bestowed upon you as a being. You're a being, which inherently means that you are part of source, part of connected divine healing energy, period. There's no not being a being, if that makes sense. The Emperor has that knowing, which is why making bold movements, seeing boldly into the future is possible in this modality, and which is why you find a lot of times Aries, though they struggle. I know you Aries out there watching, you have your challenges for sure, but Aries often have this inherent sense of why not? Why can't I do that? Why wouldn't I do that? Which is really endearing and it's very refreshing, and we need that energy because we often cut ourselves off at the knees when we are wanting a new life. Now, we're going to get into a couple details about that. On the one hand, your fantasies need to feel like this 9 of Cups, right? The 9 of Cups is a different way of seeing. This is the 9 of Cups where you are accounted for. This is the guy who's listing out his gratitude, right? He is surrounded by well-being. So much so that he's just not worried about moving or running. He's not running at a frantic pace. He is slowed down. And he knows he has what he needs right around him right now. Now, this guy understands, though, it's not about being a wealthy merchant, even though it's kind of this guy in this setting with his abundance. The reality is, though, it's in the simple things. It's in the quiet simplicity of knowing. This is a very meditative card. Great energy for writing up those 10 things that you appreciate. You can start your jar of joy for the second half of the year around this full moon too. A lot of times people start at the beginning of the year, but it's where you write something you're grateful for every day and you put it in a jar. At the end of the year, you get to open it up and read through. So if you haven't started it for the first half of the year, this is a great place to start it. Now, the Queen of Swords is where we're getting our truth because, yes, she is the truth bringer. She is the boundary setter. And here's where that Jupiter square Neptune conversation is really coming in. And we're still in Gemini season. We're still working through that. The Queen of Swords is also going to call you out, right? She's going to call you out for, okay, you have your vision. You have what you know you want. You know you deserve it, right? But certain things we don't realize we've outgrown. We're still asking for it. We're still intrigued by it, but it's just because it's habitual. And the Queen of Swords wants to cut that out. We want to get rid of any just habitual asking that doesn't actually connect with your heart anymore, but is just so familiar. We beings love our familiarity, even the most mutable of us. Even the most changeable, even the most go with the flow, have familiarity patterns. We all have it. And we all have to check in with those. We don't need to destroy all things that are familiar. Some things that are familiar are very good for us. But we often have things that we no longer need to be asking for. We often have things that we no longer need to be fantasizing about. And the Queen of Swords is about to bring that. She's clearing space for this Two of Wands. There's no way we can start to visualize what's ahead for us and get into that unimaginable horizon if we have it all cluttered up with old fantasies that aren't even that great anymore, right? We need fresh desires. As Abraham Hicks says, the fresh desires are the ones that feel good. And that is where I think this moon is really powerful. It's a stormy sea. It's very electrical. There's a lot happening. I mean, it is really a tipping point, and it will continue to feel that way for a couple of weeks leading into the eclipse on July 2nd. There's no going back. Jupiter and the moon are in the sign of expansion, exploration, move forward motion, big vision, and we need to create space for that. Now, that's what's beautiful about this, because this is where you could really connect into who you can be next, what you can experience next, where you can have adventure next. Let it surprise you. Let the energy surprise you and take you with it. I am very excited about this full moon. A little nervous. I'll admit I'm a little nervous. The moons have been kind of surprising to me recently. I think maybe it's just because I'm diving a little bit deeper in my own personal work. So I'm, the things I was describing here with witnessing and things like that are things that I'm taking deeper each time, and so I'm able to see more and more. Sagittarius, like I said, is a very close energy to me, so I'm like a little bit, it's going to hit somehow, I feel, in a way that is very personal to me, but I think we'll all be feeling this one. And, everybody experiences full moons differently. I find that each one has its own character. Some full moons, I'm just like, what? What are people talking about? And some full moons, I'm like, I can't even call people back. I've just got to sit and stare out into the night sky. So, but speak good to yourselves, take good care of yourselves. I'm wearing this lapis crown. It was designed and created for me by my dear Tiffany at PinkLune. She had this vision of this lapis crown for me. It's pure lapis, and she's replicated it. I don't know that there's going to be more than one, maybe two, I'm not sure. So that's in her shop. I'll leave her link below if you are wanting a similar one to this. This is mine, though. This is my lapis crown, and I'm very grateful to her for all she's done. So go check her out. I'll leave her stuff in the description box. You can also find me on Instagram at SarahVerba or on my website, SARAHTAROT.com. I would love to hear from you all. It's going to be a beautiful time. Hang in there. Love on yourselves. Take a deep breath. Get prepared. Love being an energetic being. And here's the other thing. Play. Create. If you have a lot of excess energy during this moon, you're feeling riled up, you're feeling a little stormy, play and create. Make some art. Write some poetry, even if you've never written poetry. Use that beautiful dynamic energy you have and put it out there in the world in a way that feels like you are connected to God, to Source. And that will really help ease any tension. If you're feeling antsy or a little itchy for the next thing and you want it, create. I love you guys so much. I'll see you for July readings, for more moon magics. There's a lot of adventure ahead.